Okay, we are starting.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event brought to you by Kensington, Chelsea, and Westminster Libraries. Our guest tonight is the award-winning First Lady of the Blues, Dana Gillespie, who today launches her new autobiography, Weren't Born a Man. Dana will be recounting the stories from her memoir, and this illustrated talk will feature some of the photographs that were never before seen from her personal archive. Dana has kindly agreed to answer some questions at the end of her presentation, so please feel free to post them in the chat during the session. We'll do our best to answer as many as possible in the time that we have. So buckle up. This sounds like it's going to be a fantastic ride. It's with great pleasure that I present to you actress, singer, songwriter, and as of today, a published author, Dana Gillespie. Welcome, Dana.
Hello and welcome to everyone who are tuned in on this. Yes, I am going to talk about my life. Okay, it is written now in memoirs, but you know, when you talk naturally, suddenly probably some other stories will come in. And of course, I will start at the very beginning because I grew up in a marvellous old Edwin Lutyens house in what was then countryside in Surrey. But my family roots all came from Norfolk, and I actually had quite a famous great-great-great-grandmother who was on the British £5 note. All of this is in the book, but everything changed the moment I got to London and I moved into South Kensington, where I still live now, and I hope I will die in South Kensington. It's my favourite part of the world. But we're going to start with my first picture, first set of photographs. And here you can see me, I'm on water skis. Now, sadly, this wasn't anywhere hot and sunny climate. This was just outside of Heathrow, the Prince's Water Ski Club, and I turned into quite a good water skier. I was British Junior Water Ski Champion for 4 years. I can't think of anything more ridiculous now, but when I was young, I was so keen on anything sporty. And I started water skiing because I was also in one of the junior snow ski teams. So I thought that if I did water skiing, I could be training in the summertime before I'd go back into the mountains. But in fact, what really happened was I found I got much better at water skiing than snow skiing. And anyway, I was then swept away in an avalanche in Davos, nearly died, actually, should have probably died. And so my water skiing took the back seat when I then discovered the joys of blues music and going down to the Marquee Club. And look what I saw when I got there. Now, some of you may not know this band, the Yardbirds, but I was 13 when I walked into the Marquee Club, and there you can see on the right is Eric Clapton, early picture. But the band themselves, there was Chris Dredger. I'm just trying to remember all the names of the band, but Keith Relf was the lead singer, and Paul Samuel Smith was on the right. He was the bass player. Jim McCarty was the drummer, and there was Eric Clapton. And I walked in to this club, and my life changed. I knew that I wanted to have something to do with music. I was already writing songs, and I was, you know, I mean, they were rather pathetic songs, but I wanted to be something to do with music. And I would be there every night that the Yardbirds were playing, and I would watch them like an eagle watching, especially Eric Clapton, because in those days he used to throw his head back and play with what I could say gay abandon. And there was one night, and I think it was about 1964, my other favourite group that I used to go and see was a band called Gary Farr and the T-Bones. And one night, the support actor Gary Farr and the T-Bones featured a rather unusual looking singer. I'm going to put his picture up now. He's there on the right. Well, actually, I will talk about him first. He came on stage with his group, and his name was David Jones. He was wearing a frilly white shirt and looked a bit like a kind of as if he'd stepped out of Sherwood Forest, slightly Robin Hood. He had knee-length suede boots with a fringe to it. And of course, everyone now knows him as David Bowie, but he was David Jones then. And I'd started anyway writing songs, and there I am with my guitar. I went out as a folk singer because actually I just couldn't afford a band, and it's slightly out of shot, but you will see that I was playing a 12-string guitar. Both Bowie and myself both played 12-string guitars, because if you're not the greatest guitarist in the world and you strum away, the 12 strings make it a fuller sound. Anyway, there was Bowie, or Jones as he was then, up on stage. I didn't really think much about him, actually, because I was so taken with Gary Farr and the T-Bones. But at the very end of the evening, I'm standing at the back of the Marquee Club with my hairbrush, brushing my, at this point, waist-length hair, and I was dressed in a tight pair of black trousers, black leather trousers, and as usual, a tight top. And suddenly, Bowie, I'll call him Bowie because it makes it easy, came up from behind me, took the brush out of my hand, carried on brushing, and whispered rather seductively into my ear, "Can I come home with you tonight?" And of course, I said yes. I was 14, almost 15. So we walked home to South Kensington because the Marquee Club was in those days in Wardour Street. So it was quite easy to walk home. It took about 20 minutes, half an hour. And yes, I smuggled him up into the house, past my parents' bedroom, and that was the start of a friendship, which I will go on later to talk about my life with Bowie in a way, because we later on did have the same management. But you know, London was so exciting in those days. Everything was happening. You know, Soho the West End was just alive with action. It was the red light district with women hanging out of windows and doors. There was music on every street corner, as I remember it. And in those days also, record companies had enough money to have record receptions. So I used to know about various record receptions when something was happening. And I used to go with Bowie, still Jones then, of course, down to the television studios of Ready Steady Goes Live eventually, and they booked me to be on the show, which I was on for a couple of weeks. And so I was starting my career. I'd made my first single. I was signed as a songwriter, as was Bowie. I was on Decca, and he was on a subsidiary of Decca called DRAM. So he used to come around to my place, and I'd play him my songs, he'd play me some of his songs. And actually, I'm slightly jumping forward a couple of years, but there was one time when I was sitting with the very famous photographer Gerard Mankiewicz at my place, and Bowie rings up and he says, "I've just written a great song, I want to come and play it to you. I'll be there in half an hour." He was there on my doorstep, and he came in and played Space Oddity to me and Gerard Mankiewicz. Little did we realize at the time that it was going to be such an iconic song. But I'll go back to Bowie in a little while, because I was out as a folk singer, you know, strumming my guitar. I was slightly in with the folk crowd. I was singing in folk clubs, and the man who played on my first single, which was a song called Donna Donna, was a folk singer called Donovan, and he'd had quite a bit of success in England, also strumming a guitar, going on stage wearing jeans. Now, it sounds silly now, but in those days, people didn't appear on stage or on television in jeans, and he wore a denim hat on his head. And he was the English version, so all the newspapers were saying, of Bob Dylan. Of course, the reality is Dylan and Donovan were very different, but also in those days, we have to remember that America was so far away. It was like flying to the moon. So whatever was going on in America, we could hardly get records, LPs over here by Americans unless they were imported in specially. But somehow the word had filtered back. There was somebody absolutely special called Bob Dylan. And I'd heard about a record reception that went on at the Savoy Hotel, a small reception, and my friend Sarah was stepping out with Donovan. So we went off to this reception, and that's where I first met Bob Dylan. The picture on the right, I think, is at this record reception. I'm a bit hazy, I can't really remember. I know where the picture on the left is, and I'm going to tell you about that. So I met him at the Savoy Hotel, and then he said that there was a reception going, a huge reception for CBS going on at the Dorchester Hotel, and all the CBS artists were going to be there. And then he left because he had interviews and things to do, and I was, of course, very attracted to this guy. You know, I've always liked a man who has a brain and has a heart, and I could see straight away that he was not your normal guy. So I heard about this reception, and I went with my friend Sarah, and we both said, we've got to get into this record reception. And we didn't have a pass, we didn't have tickets, and they wouldn't let us in. So I refused to be beaten by this. So instead, I went in through the very front of the Dorchester instead of the ballroom entrance at the side. And I said to Sarah, right, we have to pretend as if we own the place. And we walked in, and I saw a waiter sailing past the main hall, carrying a tray on his shoulders with some canapes on it. So I said, right, we'll follow him. And we followed him as he disappeared into a side door through a labyrinth of tunnels underneath the Dorchester. He disappeared, and I didn't know where to go next. So I just said, let's go through this door. And I opened up the door, and it was into the main hall where the huge reception was going on, and all the artists from CBS like the Byrds and Tony Bennett, they're all there. And I found myself walking down the steps, and just when I got to the bottom, there was Dylan. He saw me, he came up to me, gave me a kiss, and that's just when the photographer snapped away. And it's strange, all I can remember now was I was just so thankful that he came and saved me from, you know, potentially being thrown out by the bouncers, because I didn't have the right tickets. But once you're on Dylan's arm, then you're kind of safe. And so I went with him, well, I went with him to his hotel. That's another story. It's all in the book, by the way. But I also went to the Albert Hall where he was doing his concerts, and hung out with him. And when he came back the following year, which I think was 1966, he called me up straight away. I went over to the hotel and hung out with him again. And that was the year when he was playing with an electronic band. I mean, musicians as in a rock band, with some of the audience shouting out "blasphemous traitor" because they wanted him to stay a folk singer. So anyway, that's my little interlude then with Dylan. But we did team up later, and I was lucky enough to be on. He asked me to be the opening act on his tour in 1997 around Britain, which I did. So I was busy getting my music together because that's all I've ever wanted to do. People have never understood. I'm married to music. It has been my God, my lover, my answer to everything has been music. Obviously, I've had loads of guys in between, but music was always number one position in my life. So the big thing in those days was to get a record deal. I was already signed as a songwriter, and I'd done some singles, but I wanted to do LPs. So here we have my first two LPs. I was signed to Decca. There was the boss of Dick, there was a man called Dick Rowe, who was famously known for having turned down signing the Beatles. So instead he signed me up. And on the left is Foolish Seasons, my first LP. I think this must have come out in about 1967, 68. I'm very bad with years, by the way. So if you actually want accurate years, you do have to buy the memoirs. But there I am. Of course, Gerard Mankiewicz took the picture, and there I am looking hippie-ish in a caftan and a headdress, etc. And I'd written some of the songs, but the interesting thing about this album is that I had the cream of the London musicians as the studio musicians. In those days, Decca had a huge studio up near Hampstead, and on guitar was Jimmy Page, and on bass, John Paul Jones. They later went on to be Led Zeppelin, and Jimmy Page was famous for doing all the sessions in those days. I had two guys from Manfred Mann, a huge orchestra. I mean, who can afford an orchestra with strings nowadays? But this was my first album, and strangely enough, it was never released in England. Only came out on something called London Records, which is a subsidiary of Decca, and it came out in America. But some of the songs on this album actually had songs that the producer had slightly thrust upon me to sing, which is what they used to do with girl singers in those days. And I longed to do an album with only my own songs, which is what the picture on the right is. That is an LP called Box of Surprises, as you can see, and I'm sitting surrounded by stuffed taxidermied animals, except for my real life Norwich Terrier called Sneezy, who was on my lap. And you probably can't see, well, maybe you can, I'm holding the hand of a man who was actually lying, I'm sitting on a coffin, and he's actually real. It was Gary Mankovich's assistant who had to get in the coffin. But I was always crazy about taxidermied stuffed animals, and in the flat, which I had my own flat in my parents' huge house in Thurlow Square, opposite the Victoria and Albert Museum, and by this time I had been mercifully moved to the basement, where I had, from the age of 15, I had drum kits, guitars, I had all the instruments you need, and I had, I could record and everything. I also had loads and loads of glass cases of stuffed animals. I used to love to be around animals, and I know it sounds a bit perverse, but I couldn't actually keep real animals except for my dog and 2 cats. So I had these huge cases of stuffed birds and animals, and a lot of them made it into the photograph here. So then we're going to move on to my film career. Started off, I mean, really, I did some dreadful films. The one on the left, which has Fumo di Londra, which means smoke over London, stars one of the biggest stars ever in Italy, called Alberto Sordi. Sadly, he's long since dead. But I was in this film, and it was about Italians coming to London to find the hippie trail. I can't remember anything much about the film, except that he was a huge star, and I was asked to sing, and there I am sitting in a taxi serenading poor Alberto Sordi. But if I mention in Italy that I had done a film with Alberto Sordi, people go into meltdown because he's huge. He's a mega star. But they weren't all good films. The one on the right, you can see me as usual, load of cleavage, and I suppose I'm on my 12-string guitar. The Secrets of the Windmill Girls. Well, for those of you that don't know, the Windmill Theatre was the strip joint which stayed open because its logo was "We Never Close." It stayed open through all the years of the war and spawned many big names like Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe. They all appeared there. But in fact, in those days, strippers weren't allowed to move. You could be bare-breasted. Not that I was, because in fact, I was only just 16 in that film. It was actually filmed at the end of 1965, and I was born in 1949. So I was just 16. I'd written a song called, I can't even remember the name of the song, actually, but I sold it to the producers for £25, which I think may well be illegal to do that now. And I'm just in a party scene, strumming away in the corner of a room while the story goes on. It's a pretty dreadful film, but I'm showing it only because maybe you've got a sense of humour, those of you that are watching this. And at the same time, I was doing a lot of backing singing, and I'm going to show you an example of this. Oh no, before we go into backing singing, here's another film I did. I must have been just 17, The Lost Continent. Well, I mean, it was originally an old Dennis Wheatley book called Uncharted Seas. I was employed by well, they took me because they knew I'd been water ski champion, and I had to actually be in this film wearing 2 huge balloons on my shoulders. Sadly, you haven't got a picture of that. It's in the book, I think. And these 2 huge balloons plus my cleavage meant that when I went to see the film, when it finally came out at the ABC Fulham Road, when I appear on the screen, the whole audience cracks up with laughter, me too, because it's really unreal. And I'm wearing these weird things on my feet because I had to walk on this man-eating seaweed that would kill people. And I mean, it was a fantasy film. Don't forget, this was years before computer-generated films came out. There was a men inside these old animals that were kind of got claws going up and down. It was quite funny. If you ever see it, and it sometimes appears at 3 o'clock in the morning when most people should be asleep, it's a slightly cult movie. It's got Hildegard Knef, Eric Porter. I'm trying to think who. Anyway, that's just, you know, if you've got nothing else to do, watch this mad film. But at the same time of doing some films, and let's face it, I said yes to any old film because I needed the work and I got experience. And the other thing I did was, there you can see me with lovely Elton John, but on the left you can see him when I think he was still Reg Dwight. And it says Top of the Pops. The thing about Top of the Pops was Elton and I and another singer called David Byron, who was the lead singer of Uriah Heep, were employed for a company called Avenue Recordings, and we would go in and make the top 20 hits and do cover versions, because in those days there were no you would sit, if you wanted to go to a coffee bar, which was a new thing anyway, maybe there'd be a tannoy, and in order to pay less money to the original artists, you do an LP with these cover versions on. And so Elton and I and David Byron used to do all these cover versions, and I actually have almost forgotten the amount of songs that I was on, but in those days it was fantastic. We got paid £25 a week a track as a backing singer, and then if you did the lead vocal you got 50 quid. Now that was huge mega bucks in those days, and it was just so nice that Elton and I got on very well, and I'm so pleased that there's somebody who's done extremely well. But during this whole time I was still staying very much in touch with David Bowie, and he'd always used to say, you know, what we really need is a manager, but we also needed work. So I went and joined, I mean, I did a few out of London shows, but I went and did this thing you can see, Catch My Soul, the rock Othello, to which Bowie and his then wife Angie came to. I think they quite enjoyed it. But Catch My Soul was the first rock opera that had ever been done. It starred a man called Jack Good, who was a white guy, so he had to black up every night. I don't think you'd be allowed to do that now, but don't forget, this is those days. I think this might have been 1970. And it was really rather groundbreaking. We opened we were in Manchester, then we moved to the Roundhouse, and then finally landed up at the Prince of Wales Theatre, I think it was. And the man on the right is PJ Proby. Now, if you're old enough, you will remember that he had #1 hits with, one song was There's a Place Somewhere, or Maria, 2 songs from West Side Story. He always came on stage dressed as a slightly Beau Brummel type, but he suddenly got infamous because he did 2 different concerts where he split his trousers. Shock horror. I mean, nowadays, who would even give a damn? But in those days, they did. So while all of this was going on, and it was a great, great show, actually, because in between the real Shakespeare, as in, you know, the real Shakespeare words, suddenly everything would burst into a rock song, and all the people on stage, myself included, who had the most outrageous costume of everyone on the stage, we all would be gyrating and dancing about. And at the same time, I was writing my songs. I'd had my 2 LPs out, and my dream was to get another record deal because I knew I had to move on from Decca Records. And here you will see me, can't exactly remember the year, it must have been 1971 maybe. On the right, of course, is David Bowie, long hair. I'm on the left. I've obviously just come back from Mystique because I'm very brown and, as usual, bursting out of a top. And in the middle was our wonderful manager, Tony DeFries. Bowie had rung up and he'd said, listen, I think I found the man who's the perfect manager for us both. And he and his then wife, Angie, went to meet DeFries, who had a legal mind. And they both said, you know, well, especially Bowie said to me, you know, this is the guy. So I was introduced to DeFries, and of course I adored the man because he did the one thing that I've always loved in any man. And in this case, he had a great Jewish brain. He was legal. So he just said to me, let me take care of everything. And of course, Bowie and I went, yeah, bring it on. So suddenly we were able to record where we wanted. We got all the best musicians. But this actual picture was taken, I think, at the Roundhouse. It was at backstage of a strange Andy Warhol show called Pork. And the people who were in Pork then later on became the people that worked for Tony DeFries and toured as the tour manager with Bowie. But this was the start of the company called Main Man. And so Main Man organized that Bowie and I, here we are together, me still with my long hair with the hippie look, and him still with his long hair, both playing our 12-string guitars, both rather folky. And then, of course, Bowie met the wonderful guitarist Mick Ronson, or had him come down from Hull, and the rest of the band, which was Trevor Bolger and Woody Woodmansey, turned into the Spiders from Mars. And these pictures were taken, I mean, actually, the one on the right, doesn't that look lovely? He's got his arms round me. I mean, we were really good friends. I never expected, you know, you don't expect musicians to be faithful or anything. And I've always said I never wanted to be Mrs. Bowie or Mrs. Jones. We were just having a good time. But the best thing of us all is that we were involved musically. And then, of course, by this time, we had the same management company. The picture in the middle is of something that's called the Bow Promo. There were 500 copies, specially printed, of Bowie on one side and my songs on the other. And these were printed to go and try and get a record deal because we needed a good album deal. And if anybody has got, this is a bootleg, the one with the picture of me on it. So I wouldn't bother to waste your money on it, actually. If you got the actual original one, it was plain with just handwritten saying David Bowie and Dana Gillespie. And these ones go for thousands because there's Bowie fans all over the world who collect, I think it's just called Bowie Collectabilities. I have one copy which I store under my bed. So I've always said if I die, somebody's got to rush in quickly and grab this thing. So that's the start of the recording sessions, actually, that I'd done at Trident Studios. With Bowie. We were in the studios at the same time. We had different producers, but we had Rick Wakeman on piano and Mick Ronson. And at the same time, I was needing to make a living. Bowie and I had auditioned for Hair. We both got turned down, strangely enough. But I landed up as Mary Magdalene in Jesus Christ Superstar. It was the original first ever live show. I mean, there'd been a concert show of Jesus Christ Superstar, but I had always had this feeling that I was meant to be Mary, and that I just felt like I was Mary Magdalene. Of course, I got to sing that song, I don't know how to love him, every night for 8 shows a week for a year. And it was groundbreaking stuff. I remember, well, that's Paul Nicholas who played Jesus lying in my lap. And during rehearsals, we had to fight our way through picketing nuns who would be outside the stage door saying blasphemy, etc. But once the show opened at the Palace Theatre, which I think is almost the biggest theatre in London, I think it was the Archbishop of Canterbury had gone to see the show, had given it a thumbs up, and from that moment on, it was packed every night for the next 30 years. I left actually after a year because I had to leave because it was time for my knee operation, which had been damaged in the avalanche when I was younger. But here you can see the theatre. I mean, it's a great theatre. It's a lovely theatre. I had, you know, the ground floor dressing room just at the side of the stage. In other words, the Stars dressing room. And on the right, you can see the various people. There's Jesus in the front. Just to the left of him, holding a microphone, is my lovely friend who's sadly not on this planet anymore, Paul Jabara. But he wrote "It's Raining Men," one of the great songs. And it was a fantastic performance, and of course I'm there still with my hippie hairdo. And while the show was going on, we did a performance that went over Christmas. So there was a big television show on the BBC in those days called Till Death Us Do Part, starring the man in the middle, an absolute bigot his character was, Alf Garnett, played wonderfully by Warren Mitchell. So in it, Alf Garnett goes to see Jesus Christ Superstar with his wife, who he always called the silly old Moo, and his daughter, who was married to an actor called Tony Booth. Anyway, they go and see Jesus Christ Superstar, and after the show, they go into the famous Coach and Horses, the pub round the corner, where all the actors used to go in there. It's actually where, if anyone has seen that wonderful show, Geoffrey Barnard is Unwell, that Peter O'Toole starred in, that's where it was set, in the Coach and Horses. So there I am, as usual, busty, with Alf Garnett staring at my bust and Paul Nicholas as Jesus on my left. But I knew that I had to leave Superstar because it was time to go, and it was time to go actually to America. I'd finished my album, Weren't Born a Man, and here I am. Well, here are the Polaroids, actually. De Vries, who's on the left, Tony De Vries, I reiterate, the wonderful manager, because for 5 years he really looked after everyone. Bowie, there's me. Mick Ronson, for some reason, seems to be sitting on my lap. I don't know how that happened. And of course, on the right is Angie Bowie, who was also very, very instrumental in helping Bowie to get to the state, you know, well, obviously now, but the first 5 years to get him off the planet and move him to America. De Vries and Angie were very, very instrumental in this. And De Vries gave me a Polaroid camera. Now it's, I mean, against today's instant pictures, it's nothing, but he gave me this Polaroid. So you'll see a lot of Polaroids coming up. And here I am hanging out with the Bowies and little Zoe, as he was known then. He then changed his name to Joey, and he's actually called Duncan Jones now, and he's a filmmaker. But we just hung out together, and of course we moved to America. But before we left, oh, there's Angie, there's Mark Bolan. Well, Bowie and Mark Bolan were absolutely really good friends. They always used to invent some fictitious story that there was rivalry between Bolan and Bowie. There wasn't. I never saw it. They used to come round to my place when I in Thurlow Square, and it would be quite often that it'd be Bowie and Bolan and Angie often sitting on the floor over my recording machine while they'd be writing songs. I even recorded some of their songs, but do you know, I'm embarrassed to say I don't know where the tape is anymore. It's probably got lost in the eons of time. So there's a lot of Polaroids that you'll see in this show presentation, and I used to write their names underneath, so that's my writing underneath the Polaroids. So let's move on. Well, by this time, Tony De Vries had started the company called Main Man. That's the great logo. We all had T-shirts, we all had stickers. That was one of my stickers. And we all had postcards. And Tony De Vries had said, if we really want to get on in life, we have to travel through life first class. So at that time, I had also, my album, Weren't Born a Man, had come out. Whoops, there I am. Now, I've met many a man that used to say they bought this album because they loved the picture, taken, of course, by Gerard Mankiewicz. And again, rather tame by today's standards. But in those days, I think I was the first girl singer to appear in stockings and a corset on the cover of an album, RCA Records. But this was exactly the same time that Bowie was on the cover of his, I think it was his Hunky Dory album, or was it Man Who Sold the World? Yeah, anyway, he was wearing a dress. So Main Man was quite edgy. And actually, this explains why Weren't Born a Man, why my memoirs is called Weren't Born a Man, because a lot of men used to buy this album, and they told me that they used to buy it and then ask for a brown paper bag to carry it home so they wouldn't be seen clutching what might have been close to being slightly kind of too horny for them to take anywhere. But the music inside had this song, Andy Warhol, which Bowie himself had written for me. And if you listen to it, you can hear Bowie's voice, because he was my backing singer on that, and he's, of course, strumming his guitar. And then he did his version of it. And while he was kind of making great waves, I was doing Jesus Christ Superstar most nights, well, every night. So I couldn't go out and party. But there is the famous party. It was known always actually as the Last Supper, but there you can see on the right me and Bowie sitting next to each other, and on the left there's Bowie, Jeff Beck, Mick Ronson. But in fact there are quite a lot of pictures, which include, I think there was Jagger was there, Lou Reed, loads of people were there. It was a big thing, and I think it was the same night that Bowie stepped out on stage at Hammersmith and announced that Ziggy Stardust was never going to perform again. Or was it the Rainbow Theatre? You have to buy the memoirs, I'm afraid, and you'll get the facts right. Because, you know, I'm very, very bad with dates, but it was a fantastic party. And then, of course, Bowie took off for America because his album was out, and I had to still finish Weren't Born a Man. So I, in a moment of madness, I was offered to audition at the National Theatre. So here you can see the top in black and white. There's Sir John Gielgud, who played Prospero. On the top right is Peter Hall, Sir Peter Hall, and I went to audition for him. And he gave me a copy of, you know, The Tempest, because it was to audition for The Tempest. He said, read this, and it was for the part of Juno, who was considered all things good to men. Well, I do know a bit about that. So I read it, and of course I was pretty hopeless, because I don't ever really consider myself an actress. I've always thought of myself as musician first. I wasn't very good, and I said to him at the end, you know, this isn't very good. And he said it wasn't very good. And let's face it, you've got to be of the ilk of Sir John Gielgud to do Shakespeare justice. So then Sir Peter, as he was called, well, Peter Hall, handed me back the book, and he said, okay, sing it now. And I sang exactly the same words, just invented a melody, and the moment I added music to it, it took off. I was really good. He said straight away, the part is yours. And the reason why you see Julie Covington, who of course had the huge hit with Don't Cry for Me, Argentina, myself and Jenny Agutter, who everyone remembers now from Call the Midwife, we shared a dressing room because Julie and I had to be in this sort of fantasy sequence, hence the rather peculiar costume and rather strange clothes. So I stuck that out. I did that while main man, by this time, Bowie and Angie and everyone had moved to New York, and I was desperate to go. And then, of course, once I get to New York, and once I'd finished my stint at the National Theatre, having realised that acting really isn't for me, I knew nobody was ever going to offer me any parts except for things with plunging necklines and chamois leather and cave girls and pterodactyls and dinosaurs. Off I went to New York, and David and Angie were staying in the Sherry Netherlands Hotel, and I moved in with them. And of course Zoe, the baby, was there, and Marion, the nanny, and there was a few other rooms. People were coming and going. We were there for, it felt like months, having a whale of a time, as only one can do when in New York. And I mean, there you can see on the right, there's Bowie and Mick Jagger, because he used to be a regular visitor. He used to stay around the corner in the plaza, and there you can see him again. I'm sorry, the picture on the left with Mick, I don't know what happened to the Polaroid. It seemed to kind of melt on the top. But I just used to take loads of pictures. On the right, of course, is Jagger and Angie, because he'd come round and visit me and Angie when Bowie was out on the tiles somewhere. And there, the one in the middle is Jeff McCormack, who was Bowie's backing singer for many years, and then was also in the fantastic Diamond Dogs tour show that sadly nobody in England ever saw, but it has to be, and I've said this over and over again, one of the greatest shows ever, but it never came to England. So these are all my personal collection of Polaroids. And there I am. Well, Angie, of course, used to love dressing me up, and David, I mean, because she was great with clothes. I've always said, left to my own devices, I'd just be in a pair of jeans and a shirt. So I'm wearing an outfit designed by a woman called Natasha Korniloff, who used to design Bowie's clothes too. So Bowie had demanded that he had a grand piano put into his suite in the hotel. So there I am, as it says, propping up the piano. There's Zoe, sweet little boy, and there's David. I don't know why he's got that hat on, but he must have had it on for some reason. And around this time too, I was flitting between London and New York. I had done this album, Ain't Gonna Play No Second Fiddle. There's the Andy Warhol picture on the front. I've still got another version of the picture here in my kitchen, actually. And I had a different feel for music by then. I was already getting into blues, and Ain't Gonna Play No Second Fiddle is actually an old Bessie Smith song. And although this was a Main Man and RCA production with great pictures on the back of it, again, Polaroids, and, you know, this album, I was very pleased with this. A lot of the songs, nearly all of them, bar two of the songs, were my own compositions. So this was my fourth LP, and I suppose this came out in about 1974. And at this time, we were all still in New York. And as you can see, I'm singing in a place called Reno Sweeney's, which was a hot, trendy place in those days. On the right, you can see myself standing face to face with Raquel Welch. For the older lot of you, you'll remember that she was a huge film star. And in the middle, actually, in a fur coat, was De Vries's then girlfriend, Melanie. And below is Raquel, or the Rack, as we used to call her, actually not to her face. But there was one night in Reno Sweeney's where literally in the audience was Raquel, Bowie, Dylan, Bette Midler, Janet Leigh, I think Tony Curtis. The list was endless, and I was performing. It was a bit of a star-studded evening, and it had been really well kind of advertised all over the place. But by this time, Main Man and Bowie was starting to have a bit of a fallout. I mean, it's well documented, and I write about it in a bit more detail. I don't want to go into it now. It's in the book. Buy the book is all I can say. So the company kind of folded. Bowie stayed in America. I went back to England. And because there was litigation going on, I couldn't record for anyone for a few years. So I moved into film. And there you can see me in a Ken Russell film, Marla. On the right, you can see I'm sitting next to Robert Powell, who plays Marla. And it's a rather curious film for those of you who've seen it. I play Anna von Mildenberg, Marla's opera-singing mistress. And in it, I actually get the chance to write a song for the film, which I sing. Anyway, you know, I did quite a few films. Here's another film that I did. No. Oh, yes, no, I did a musical as well while the litigation was going on, because I couldn't record for anyone. This Mardi Gras was, I had to play a kind of a black courtesan, a hooker, basically, but they couldn't find any black blues singers in town, so they took me because she had to be a blues singer. So in order to get round the race card without upsetting too many people, they said I was an octoroon, in other words, 1/8 black. So you know, and that's what I do. I sing blues. Not many people do these days, but I still do. And then I did another epic film, The People That Time Forgot, or as I used to jokingly call it, the film that people forgot. It was part of a trilogy. This is part 2. And there I am, cave girl, chamois leather as usual, with Doug McClure. And the picture on the right shows me with an actor called Milton Reed. And I'm about to be sacrificed into the volcano, but I get saved at the last minute. it's all, again, pre-computer generated stuff, but pretty good if you like your early fantasy films. Anyway, then I went on and did another film, this was actually a whole load of fun, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. I have written sort of about this. I have to play, the man on the top right is a fantastic actor called Hugh Griffiths, and I had to play his girlfriend, or his other half, and Dudley meets me, and of course everyone knows that Dudley was rather small, so he only came up to the height of my cleavage, spent the whole time getting lost down my cleavage. And the picture on the bottom right, the black and white picture, on the right hand side, wearing hats, you can see Peter Cook as Sherlock, because he's got the Sherlock deerstalker hat on. Dudley Moore is Watson, and then there's Terry Thomas, Joan Greenwood, Denham Elliott, and I can't remember if it's and Hugh Griffiths, and The Hound is somewhere on the left. It was a total disaster film, but if anyone sees it, it's worth seeing, because you've got the cream of all the British actors. Then I did another film, directed by Nicholas Roeg, Bad Timing, and there I am with Art Garfunkel. I have a bed scene with Art Garfunkel. My only time ever on a bed scene. I said to Nick Roeg, I've never met Art Garfunkel. You better introduce us, because we're going to be in bed together very shortly. So I was introduced to him, and the film came out. And it's strange, because Bowie also did a Nick Roeg film, which was, of course, The Man Who Fell to Earth. But Bad Timing was an odd sort of love story about necrophilia. I won't go into it more, but if you want to watch something strange, watch that. Then, well, this is just a sort of mad photo. On the right, of course, is Keith Moon, who I used to know quite well in the early days, because I remember The Who playing in The Who, which he was the drummer of, playing in the Marquee Club before they were The Who. They were called the High Numbers then. But he and I hung out a lot together. He was a complete nutter. So was my dear, dear, dear friend on the left, Lionel Bart, who wrote Oliver, which has to be one of my favourite musicals of all time. And Lionel lived round the corner from me in South Kensington, and we used to meet regularly in the little Polish restaurant, the Duckies, because that was equidistance between our two places. And I've got many, many adventures with both these naughty men in my memoirs. Get it if you want to laugh. And then, of course, that takes me to Mustique. I first went to Mustique in 1970. And there you can see Princess Margaret. And I'm on the right in a green swimming thing. I don't know who that man's behind is bending over. I guess it was a waiter. I'm not even sure who the man in the middle was, but Princess Margaret used to go there because it was the one place on the planet where she could go and let her hair down. And I went there many, many times. I first went there with my mother and stepfather, and later on ran the Mustique Blues Festival for 20 years. I started it with my old pal Basil Charles. But on the right is a photograph that was quite infamous, actually. It's Princess Margaret with a wonderful, hysterical guy called John Bindon, who was known as a bit of a villain. I mean, he had been 8 years inside. Anyway, he's wearing a T-shirt borrowed from me, which, of course, has got "Enjoy Cocaine" written on it, which was quite edgy in those days. Anyway, I introduced them, and there was always lots of talk about, did he have an affair with her or not? I put this absolutely clear in my book. You can read that if you want to, but I took the picture and never really got credit for it, but still. But there we are in Mustique. There's Basil Charles, OBE, and he even went to Prince William and Catherine's wedding. And that's his fantastic bar where every night for 15 days every year, up until 5 years ago, when I stepped out of running the festival for 20 years, I used to make an album every year of all the acts. We had great blues on it, and the money raised from selling the CDs went to help Basil Charles's charity. Bottom right is just a little bit of the the London Blues Band. On the right is Jake Zeitz, who's my wonderful co-writer on many songs, the guitarist. And on the left on saxophone, and he also played harmonica, is the man Mike Pace, who's been by my side on stage for nearly 40 years, but sadly he died a few weeks ago, so he's no longer another one who's in that great rock and roll band in the sky. And there Mick Jagger gets up and sings one year at the festival. I don't know why I'm squeezed into a tiger skin trouser suit, but anyway, there's Mick doing his thing, and that's really only to show you that it was such a lot of fun. 15 days. My job was to get musicians to come and play for free, because it was a charity. It's not that difficult to get musicians to come to a 5-star plus island like Mustique, everything paid for, in the sunshine, in the end of January, when the weather is dreadful everywhere else. So I can now actually say I've produced a couple of tracks with Mick Jagger on it, and Ronnie Wood was also there as well, but more of that later. By this time, this must have been about 1983, I think, I was starting to do not just blues albums, but songs. I'd had a huge #1 hit in Europe. Of course, I couldn't get anyone interested in England to release it. It was a song called Move Your Body Close to Me. And the record company then decided that I could go to Morocco. Yippee! I love Morocco. So I went with and filmed 2 pop videos there. One song called It Belongs to Me, which was actually directed by my then boyfriend, Jörg Huber, another one who's not on this planet anymore. And there I am in the Palais Badi, which is in Marrakesh. I can't think what the locals thought of me, singing this other song, I'm in Danger Tonight, which we filmed in the Jnal Fna, the main square in Morocco. I've always loved Morocco. And by this time I was getting spiritual leanings. This happens to people, and I'd read a book on Sai Baba, and Satya Sai Baba is the greatest teacher that had been in India. I mean, this was about 40 years I read the book, and I decided to go and see what on earth was happening. 3 weeks later, I'd leapt on a plane expecting him to say, I've been waiting for you, and let me, here you are, the chosen one. And he actually ignored me for 12 years. But after 12 years of me coming and sitting silently, for his 70th birthday, Sai Baba asked if I would come and sing, and I sang in a stadium, which was, well, you can see that's the 80th birthday actually, and there's Sai Baba, and he was sometimes used to wear white at his birthday, but there would be nearly 1 million people there. I mean, you have no idea what it's like to sing in front of nearly 1 million people. It was massive, and I was so lucky. He'd asked me to sing nearly every year from his 70th birthday till his 85th, and or maybe later. As I said, I'm very bad on years, except for 2 years when I was ill, so I couldn't make it. But this year, 2019 is the first year when I haven't been to India because of the virus going on. But normally I would be singing in India, and it means I've also made about 10 albums in Sanskrit, which I learnt over there. It's a type of song called bhajans, and I've got to say that if anyone says to me, what has been the biggest influence in your life apart from my parents, it's got to be Sai Baba, who completely put me on the right track of life. And okay, we're on to, here's just some happy snaps. Top left is Ronnie Wood, who I've known since 1964 actually, with bending over my friend Jörg Huber, the famous artist. The one in the middle, where I've got an orange and thing round scarf, I'm there with Donald Fagen from Steely Dan, Taken and Mustique. The one top right is me with one of the best drummers ever, Richie Hayward, another one who's playing in that blues band in the sky, but he played in a band called Little Feat. Bottom left is Roger Daltrey from The Who, because I was in a version of Tommy. I played the Acid Queen, which was a lot of fun. The one in the middle was a girls' concert, which is Bonnie Tyler on the right, Chaka Khan in the middle, and me on the left. And the bottom right picture is me with Jimmy Page, because Jimmy Page and Robert Plant came to visit me in 1980 when I was doing a stage show in Vienna. I was doing a lot of work in Vienna then, but at the same time, I also had the London Blues Band. So here you can see me with the London Blues Band on stage at the wonderful 606 Club in Chelsea, which is a place I still play quite often. I'm going to give my band a name check because the London Blues Band has to be the best on the planet. You've got Dino Baptiste on piano, on keyboards, Jake Zeitz on guitar. The back is Jeff Walker on bass. The drummer is Evan Jenkins. And of course, there on the left on saxophone is Mike Pace, who is no longer with us. So these are wonderful guys. And I still record a lot. And this is my last two albums, my latest albums. My 70th album is, or is it my 69th album? I'm getting confused. 69th or 70th is Under My Bed, which I did with the London Blues Band. And I'm really pleased about that. Sadly, we were about to go out and do loads of promo and live gigs to perform with it. But of course, you know, circumstances closed concerts down. And the one on the left is with an Austrian band, Al Cook. And I managed to, I always wanted to do very old style blues, the kind of music I grew up on, which is Bessie Smith, all slightly kind of risque lyrics. And this album is very, very old style blues. It came out on an Austrian label. And you know what makes me very happy? I wrote a song for it, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. It's called FCK Blues, and the reason I called it FCK Blues is because the punchline of the chorus is FCK Blues, the only thing that's missing is you. Well, I thought it was quite funny. You've got to have a sense of humor in blues, by the way. If you don't have a sense of humor, don't bother to listen to this music. So here I am on my front doorstep with my guitar case, and if you move in closer, you might be able to see some of the stickers and everything. And because I used to travel a lot with my guitar, now I tend to play piano much more. But anyway, so this is me at home, and the address on the right is to do with the book Weren't Born a Man. Now, if you order on Amazon, you can actually get to see it. You know, here I'm actually with the postcard. I'm all specially signed, which has gone into the version that you can buy on, and more unseen pictures. I don't know if you can actually see this. Oh, well, it's actually, you go in on something on the publisher's name, which is Hawksmoor Publishing, and they'll send it to you. But I guess Amazon, I don't know. I'm so old-fashioned, I've never ordered anything online because I don't do anything like that. I leave that for the rest of the world. But if you've enjoyed this little talk and you want to know more, then please go into Hawksmoor and you'll get some great stories, I think. I think that may well be it. Oh, yes, you've got questions and answers. So I'm ready to answer anything. Hit me with them.
Dana, that was so interesting. We have a lot of questions.
Oh, gosh.
That have come through. So Paul Johnson.
Nina, can I just
Yes.
stop for a moment? You've got a bit of an echo, so I don't know whether it might be. Have I got an echo? Anybody?
No, could you ask questions then?
Might be better. Sorry about that.
Excellent.
But
Go ahead.
I want to switch your mic off. Sorry, Nina.
All of this techno stuff.
Sorry. Okay, there's a lot of questions, so we'll try and get through some. I've got a bit of an echo, but we'll do our best.
It doesn't sound, neither of you sounded bad to me here, so maybe it's just what you hear, and maybe
could be.
people
I'll
see.
ask a couple, and then we'll transfer to Nina, just in case one of us is working and one of us isn't. Apologies to people out there. Paul Johnston from Dunfermline. Do you have any regrets in life?
None whatsoever. What's the point in regretting? Past is past. I live in the now because it's the best place to be. These days, nobody can make any plans. No, I don't regret. And if anything ever looks in my book, I was asked this today by an interviewer, actually, what I would maybe think about some perhaps dubious choices that I might have made. I've always felt that I've learnt the most from my mistakes. I don't regret anything, and I had a ball. I had a whale of a time. No regrets at all. Non, je ne regrette rien.
That's fabulous. Colin Pritchard, was Keith Moon as mad as the stories make out?
Yes, he was. There's a few pages on him in my book, so yes, he was. I mean, probably not helped by the amount of pills he took, but that's just how he was. He was mad on stage. If you see any old film footage of how he played drums, and I used to be a drummer. I've always had a soft spot for drummers, actually. You know, he played like he had 10 arms and was going bonkers. He was like that on stage and off.
Were you in a production of The Black Mikado at the Oxford Playhouse in the 70s?
No.
No. Yeah, that's a slightly odd one, but never mind. Barry says, I know you attended the funeral of Mark Bolan, but did you have any interaction with him during 1977 at all?
I had a lot of interaction with Mark Bolan because actually his manager also was a very good friend, Tony Howard. I can't tell you what years I had interaction with him, but we were just friends. And the funeral was quite touching, actually, because, you know, I mentioned this in the book about how he'd given me a minivan, a van, because I've always loved vans. And he knew I didn't have a car, and he said, no, I don't want to drive a Mini because I might die in a Mini. And it's weird, he did die in a Mini, and every time I drive over, which isn't that often, but the bridge in Barnes, where he died, you can still see some flowers sort of pinned there. The funeral was quite sad. You know, I sat in a pew, if that's the right word, right behind Rod Stewart, and Bowie was literally in front of me, and the silence in that place was broken by a terrible wail, a howl of anguish as the coffin was brought in before it went on the flames, and all the fans outside all had mascara running down their faces because, you know, he'd gone. He was a lovely guy, fabulous guy, Mark.
I bet. Yeah, so young. Achincha, I'm probably not pronouncing that right, has said, hi Dana, can you tell more about life in the ashram in India and how you managed to organise such huge concerts in such a rural village?
Oh, that must be Achincha. Well, I never really organised things. When one plays for Sai Baba, it's somehow organised for you. Nobody was more surprised than me that Sai Baba would ask me to go and sing blues over there. But he once said that blues is very spiritual music, and it's very true. You know, anything that comes from the heart has to be good, and that was one of the main teachings of Sai Baba is that live your life real. You know, don't try and pretend to be somebody else. And okay, I have sung some of the bhajans, the Sanskrit music, in front of Sai Baba, in front of the thousands and thousands and thousands, but he always really liked me to do my Western music because I'm able to get his messages of love across to people that wouldn't normally hear it. I've always said, if I go out and talk about Sai Baba, I preach to the perverted, not the converted, because they already know the teachings about him. I could go on for hours and hours about life in the ashram, but I probably won't, because some people who don't know about Sai Baba, this won't mean that much to you. But my advice is, I would try and check him out, because you might be surprised at what you could learn.
Jeff asks, have you had any contact with Bob Dylan since the 60s?
Well, yes, I saw him in the 70s in New York. And of course, in 1997, he'd asked me to be his opening act for his British tour. So, yes, I had quite a bit of contact with him. And I've got I'll make it very brief, a nice story. On the final day, he'd insisted that I do the Wembley Arena with him. And that was the one day that my actual drummer then, Chris Hunt, couldn't make the gig because he was booked to play with Lonnie Donegan, and I couldn't get one drummer in London to be free. So I rang the last drummer in my book that I hadn't contacted, and it was Roger Taylor for Queen. And I said, Roger, this is Dana Gillespie. Would you come and play for my gig with Dylan, and he said, no problem at all. Can you imagine how my ratings went up when Roger Taylor had his drum kit set up and I came out on stage and there's Roger? To this day, I have to say thank you to Roger, because he wouldn't even take the fee that the paltry support acts get paid. And I love a man who's a cavalier. My mother brought me up to the sentence, manners maketh man. And Roger Taylor had plenty of them, as did Dylan, as it happens.
Keith P asked, did you ever hang out with the Cray twins?
No.
No.
Sorry,
Okay.
Keith, never met them. My world, apart from knowing John Bindon, and I actually have never really known villains. It's not kind of my thing.
This is just putting you in touch with John Brereton, who wants to know if you'd be up for being the guest at next year's Dublin Bowie Festival to give a talk.
It's pronounced Bowie, by the way.
Sorry.
I mean, yes, I would. I mean, when Bowie had his huge exhibition here, I mean, he obviously wasn't physically here, but at the V&A, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it went, and I remember the queues went around the corner for from all the way up the exhibition road, and it was a massively successful exhibition. But they'd asked me if I'd give a talk in the auditorium there, which I did with Holly Johnson and another man called Kevin Cann, and I had to do it, let's say, an hour. And I don't take notes. I don't need notes. I have enough stories on Bowie to last forever. So that fellow who just asked if I would give a talk, yes, if he wants me to, I'm happy to do it. I say yes to anything, actually, if I think people will enjoy what I have to say. And I've got so many stories, and there's so many fans of Bowie. You know, what I can't do is talk about Bowie after 1975, because I never saw him after that. I only know the early years, you know, after when he was in America. And I don't really go to America much. I'm very European. I like European food and everything. So I stick to Europe. So yes, but I'm yes, happy to do anything if I'm asked.
Melissa asked, did you ever do any busking in the 60s or in the 70s, I guess?
No, never did. I guess I would. The nearest I got to busking is if I see a busker, I usually put some money in his hat, because I've always thought, there but for the grace of God go I. But no, I never did.
So I guess we probably ought to be wrapping up pretty soon, but Sissy has asked Mr. Smith about your long-standing connection to Vienna. Are they covered in the book?
Yes, there is, because I ended up doing a play for My Zetterling in 1980, and I stayed on. I was there for a long time, first of all because of my friendship with the wonderful artist Jörg Huber, but I sang for 3 years on and off with the Mojo Blues Band, who are very famous over there. And even now, since 1983, I've made albums and do concerts all the time with a fantastic boogie-woogie pianist called Joachim Palden and his trio. So I'm nearly always, well, I was, except for last year when nobody was going anywhere. I was always doing concerts over in Vienna. I have a big love of Vienna, and I speak German thanks to going there so often. And I hope I'm meant to be going back to sing in a great place called Jazzland in March, but who knows? You can't make plans any longer.
There's a couple of people, both Todd and Brian, basically asking the same question. How are you spending time in this lockdown madness?
Oh, I had a great time. The moment I knew about the lockdown, first of all, I went for an hour-and-a-half walk every morning at 5:30 in the morning just to watch the dawn round Hyde Park, and I realised how much I actually love this city and what a great park it is. Because for 30 years I've been a swimmer every morning. There's a swimming pool around the corner from me, but I can't swim because the pools are closed. So I did a walk. Plus, I was able to work with David Shasha, who's my co-author on so much of this book was put together chronologically, because I can't remember dates or years or anything. So we worked on finishing the book. That took the whole of the summer. Plus, I wrote with Jake Zeitz, my co-songwriter, for the this new album, Deep Pockets, which was recorded in the summer. Plus, I finished all the lyrics for another new album, which I worked with a man called Nick Hogarth, and I'm in the studios now working on them. So I've been pretty busy, actually. And I don't mind lockdown. I'm a bit of a loner. You know, I live alone. I mean, I would love to have a pussycat in the house, but you know, so lockdown was no hardship for me. And as long as I can go out walking, and I don't see anyone at 5:30 in the morning because nobody else bothers to get up that early.
Okay, I guess a couple more questions, if you don't mind, because we're starting with money. Tris says, given you trained as a drummer and a musician, have you considered being a record producer?
I've produced many albums. First of all, I produced all the albums from the Mystique thing, and all the blues albums I do. Well, I can say producer, but of course the answer all lies in the mixing, and I'm really lucky to work with a guy called Dominic Brett, who has a studios called Wolf Studios, and I think it's about 38 years I've sat next to this man while he touches the machinery, but the production goes on. But when you're lucky enough that you're sitting next to somebody whose judgment and taste you judge, often I don't have to say anything. I mean, occasionally we have some comments with each other, but when you're in tune with each other, then as long as I have a great team around me, and the team is in this case him for mixing and everything, yeah, I love producing. I would be happy to produce other people too, but these days everyone is tends to do everything themselves. But I've produced far too many albums. I can't even remember the amount now. I've released though 70 or was it 71 albums, so that's how much I know about being in studios. I live in studios. It's where I could put down roots in studios.
And I think if we finish, before I hand back to Nina, on a couple of questions from Jennifer.
Okay.
Who's your favourite singer and composer, and what are you planning next?
That's I mean, it's impossible to answer. I mean, I long to be on Desert Island Discs just so that I could actually could choose 8 songs and things. And my next project, well, I need to finish these 2 albums, Deep Pockets and Smooth Seas. They've got to be mixed and finished, which they will be, I hope, by the end of February. I'm doing the audio book of Weren't Born a Man. The Kindle, I think, has been released, I think, today as well, through Hawksmoor. And the moment I finish an album, I usually think, oh, God, what am I going to do? And then ideas start coming to me and I start writing more songs. So I'll probably just wait till the gigs open up. All the gigs that I had with the London Blues Band have been shifted and shifted forwards and forwards. So I hope I can actually do some of the concerts, and then I'll be writing a new album. That's what I do. I like to make records and, albums.
Fabulous.
Dana, that's wonderful. Let me try and tune in. I'm sorry for the sound problems, but
You sound normal to me. Any more questions?
There are a lot of questions. Do you want us to try and go through a few more?
Yeah,
I don't think we can.
What else are we doing tonight? Nothing. If I wasn't sitting eating.
Nina, you take over.
So how about, how good were the Action at the Marquee? They were my favorite 60s band, says Paul Johnson.
I remember the Action. They were great. I mean, they were another band. It was the Action, Gary Farr and the T-Bones, the Yardbirds, and the Who. And there was another band called Blossom Toes. And I was just in there every night. But the Action were great. And I cannot remember the lead singer's name, which is an embarrassment because I used to know them quite well. But they were fabulous. Fabulous.
Fantastic. And Sarah Captain says, Dana, I was also a part of Rita Rocca's documentary London Boy. I was impressed with your Italian. Do go to the Dublin Bowie Festival. It is wonderful, she says, so I'm sure.
Well, I'd go if they invite me. And strangely enough, I watched Rita Rocca's thing, which came out, I think it was only last week, obviously to celebrate, if that's probably the wrong word, Bowie's death and birthday. And it came out on Rai Cinque. on Italian television, but it was really good. She did a fantastic job of it, and this London boy thing. And I speak Italian because my father used to live on Lake Maggiore, and I go to Italy a lot. And you know, I've got musical ears. If you put me in any country and you leave me there for a couple of weeks, I'll land up speaking the basics of the language. So my Italian is basic, but you know, you can get by with charm. People think you speak much better than you do.
Absolutely. I think I'm the follower of the same creed. Italian is so musical, and I've always been convinced that the sense of music, the talent for music, equates to a talent in languages because you just hear it.
Yeah.
So
I speak the language of the heart too, Nina. So that's, you know, that's the most important thing, is to speak the language of the heart. And then anyone, you know, I've been sent, this is actually to do with the Sai Baba crowd all over the world, from literally Kyrgyzstan, Siberia, Dagestan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, America, Australia, all these places. And I speak to, well, obviously not America and Australia, but I speak in these countries. I have translators actually with me, but people respond to the language of the heart. So that's the most important language to speak.
thank you. That's wonderful. I fully agree. Can we? Oubliette would like to know, did you see Lazarus, the Bowie musical? And if so, what did you think of it?
Was that the one that came in, that was showing in England soon after?
The last album that came out a couple of days before his death,
yeah,
I think.
Well, I went to see the show, and it was at, where was it?
Oh, the show, yeah.
It was at King's Cross, and the reason I went actually is I worked sometimes with a piano player called Matt Guest, who was one of the keyboard players in it, and so I went to see it, and I thought it was quite impressive, I must say. You know, in a way, I mean, there's lots of tracks of Bowie that I've liked, but I was so connected with him in the early years that the later stuff I don't really sit and listen to. Well, I don't really sit and listen to Bowie stuff because of being so close to the early years. So it's songs from, you know, before, from Ziggy Stardust backwards, that I have more of a connection with.
I see. So a couple of people have questions like, what is your funniest memory with Bowie? What is your last memory of time spent with Bowie?
Funny. When I think about Bowie, I'm not actually thinking about a barrel of laughs, actually, although we did laugh a lot. I mean, especially in the early days, you know, and I'm talking about the 60s, just hanging out when he had his, I suppose the funny thing actually was when he did stay the night, which I mentioned this, you know, when I was 14 or something, and I had to introduce him to my parents the next morning, and they shook hands with him, and when he walked off, my father said, I thought it was a girl. I thought you had a girl staying the night in your bed. Well, anyway, it was Bowie, and he used to come and pick me up from school and carry my ballet shoes. I don't know, that funny is not really, I can't think of any rib tickling episodes with him, but he was a lot of fun to be with. You know, I never had hassles with him because, you know, I wasn't married to him for a start, which made life a whole lot easier. What was the other bit of the question?
We can go, I think people wanted to know what was your last memory, what was your happiest memory with him, but I suppose
last memory I could say probably was really at the end of the Diamond Dogs tour. We all went back to New York, and by this time he was pretty wasted and tired and thin and wired, and you know, he just
Thin White Duke, was it?
Yes, exactly, Thin White Duke times. And then once I came back to England, I never saw him again. But I've always known, you know, a lot of the people that I've known who became really, really famous, years can go by and I don't see them. And if I suddenly bump into them, whether it's Jagger or Jimmy Page or whatever, it's as if time has not, you know, has stood still. You carry on where you met them last time. I have never thought of all these people I've never thought of as global stars. They were just my pals who I met along the way.
I must say, you depict that time in London with beautiful panache and color. And I can just imagine this swinging London of the 60s where everything's possible. I mean, it
Yes.
still is a very exciting, vibrant city, maybe not in the COVID situation, but that is something that's, you think, it's a wonderful time to have been alive. You were really lucky to have lived through such a such rich experiences. So this far, it's been very exciting. Somebody wants to know, are you planning any more books? I wanted to know, how was it for you expressing yourself in words? Because you obviously are very good at expressing yourself through music, through dance. Okay, you said through film, not so in your own estimate. But how was it writing the book?
Well, it had its moments. I mean, I started it about 8 years ago, and it went through various different versions. I think there's enough stories actually to do volume 2, because there were so many stories that had to be cut out. The publisher, who was kind of editing a bit, James, he said, if I don't take out some of the stories, people are going to lose the will to live, because they won't be able to pick up the book. It'll be physically heavy, because you can't make a book far too long. So that does leave the option open for volume 2, but it's a bit soon to do it. I mean, writing it, I'm not very good with techno stuff. So, I mean, I use a computer like a typewriter. So it was very difficult for me to find dates and facts and everything, which was where, of course, David Shasha came in, so invaluable, because if I would say, oh, I think I was vaguely doing something at a gig in, let's say, in 1973, and he immediately would know, no, you were there or you weren't there, because I can't remember these things. I think I was probably having too much of a good time. So it was nice to have a little bit of assistance there. The actual physical typing, I'm slow. I'm a 2-finger typer. I'm very impressed when I see young people who are able to send messages on their mobile telephones with their thumbs. I just stick one finger on it and pray that something's going to work.
Well done. Francesco Donadio wants to know, which year did you support Dylan? He didn't catch that bit in your presentation.
I think it was 1997. I think it was 1997. Again, I'm very hazy. That's why if people want to know these things, they've got to get the book, because all the facts are actually more correct than if you sit and ask me them. I just know what it was like to be on tour with him. What an honor. What a joy to be on tour with Dylan, and for him to say how much he liked my songwriting. I mean,
he's a Nobel Prize winner, after all. I mean, how many Nobel Prize winners can you find yourself on stage with?
And the rest.
And the rest.
Yes.
Exactly. So somebody says, hi from Vienna, Michael, front desk. Maybe this is some code language. Are you going to bring your book next time to Jazzland, or do I have to get it shipped?
I think people probably should order from Hawksmoor. The trouble is the books are physically quite heavy. The hardback is quite heavy. The softback is a little bit lighter, but it's heavy. So I'm not sure that I'm due to be in Jazzland in the middle of March, but people should, I mean, these days everyone does everything online. I'm the only fossil that doesn't do anything online. And I have to remind people that I drive a car with wind down windows and a cassette machine. And I refuse to get into the modern world because I'm not interested in life online. But if you want the book, my suggestion is order it online, because I won't be carrying, my luggage is going to be weighed down by my clothes. And I'm usually carrying CDs. I know people don't even buy CDs anymore, but they do at blues clubs. So I might have 1 or 2 copies, but don't forget though that if you do order it and you go to Hawksmoor, you're going to get it's signed by me, and this special card with some extra pictures. So I'd do it that way if you got any sense.
Yes, sounds like a good plan, that. There's Tony Bell from Brooks Blues Bar.
Oh, yes. Hi, Tony.
He says, "Hi, Dana. Love you madly, and this is a gorgeous launch. Utterly devastated at the recent loss of Mike Pace. And although irreplaceable, do you have anybody in mind to try to fill his place in your band? Many kisses. P.S. Need a copy of Take It Off Slowly, please." Pretty please, it seems.
Well, again, people have to order online, although I do have a copy here somewhere of Take It Off Slowly. And sadly, Brooks Blues Bar, which is a place I have played with Dino Baptiste and Jake Zeitz, it's well, nowhere's open at the moment. What was the beginning bit of the question? I've forgotten. Oh yeah, Mike Pace. Yeah, Mike Pace, of course, the marvelous sax player. The trouble is he's very difficult to replace. Saxophone is not the problem. Mike Pace was an absolute virtuoso with harmonica. And where do you find two instruments in one man? And a lot of my songs have always needed harmonica. So I have got a couple of sax players in mind. And on the latest record, Deep Pockets, we used an amazing player called Tom Muller. He's great, but he lives in Vienna. And of course, there's Martin Winning, who lives in England. There's a few of them, but it's really who's around at the time. I have to see, but to find somebody who plays a harmonica as well, that's going to be difficult shoes to fill. And I'm going to Mike Pace's funeral, actually, on Wednesday week, 27th. He used to play the Jules Holland.
I'm very sorry to hear that you've had suffered a loss.
Well, do you know, I don't see loss like everyone else does, because I've known so many people who've died. It's just, you know, they've moved on, and
And you've had Sai Baba for your friend, so
yes, Sai Baba has really taught me the best way to look at death, because it's a blink of an eye. You know, obviously I'm going to miss Mike Pace, and, you know, on stage, but he played on so many albums that he's with me, you know, forever. And you know, my whole band came with me and played in India at Sai Baba's birthdays. So, you know, I'm connected. So I don't see death like most other people do. And I've always said that my father always used to say to me, if you got a choice between going to a wedding or a funeral, go to the funeral, because at least you'll know the outcome. Let's face it, how many people do you know have got married and they're divorced within 5 years? So I don't view death as so terrible.
Fantastic. You have offers coming in. There's Todd Sharpville, who says, "Dana, will you join me for an interview and musical guest appearance with my band at my new recording broadcasting facility in Camden? It would be lovely to catch up properly. It's been far too long. We start filming at the beginning of February, so sending you much love." So
well, I'm around, but I'm in the studios actually, you know, singing and mixing and whatever for the next few weeks. But yeah,
okay. It's a bit naughty. They want to get me. Sorry.
I don't think anyone's allowed to travel anywhere at this moment in time, though. I don't know.
Exactly. There were a couple of questions relating to that, how you're coping with COVID. Does writing your book now, being engrossed in publicizing it at the moment, does that help you look to the future, you know, thinking about the past? Does it help you see the light at the end of this particular tunnel with the pandemic?
No, well, the thing is, I have a sunshine disposition. I'm happy and cheerful. I mean, it must drive other people nuts, but I'm actually cheerful and happy. So I haven't ever felt lonely or down or going bonkers through this pandemic, because, you know, I can look out the window, I can go for a walk, I eat well. I've got melodies going on in my head. I've got great memories. So I'm never bored. There's books to read, there's songs to write, there's things to think about. I've got birds to feed. I've got green parrots that swing on my tree outside. I've got stuff to do all day long. I've got friends. I'm never, ever unhappy anymore. Even when, you know, some of my best friends in the world have died, I'm not unhappy, because it's just another chapter in life. And I think people have to wise up and not cling to possessions and things that they think are important. Nothing is important, only love is important, and how to spend love. Oh, look, my telephone's ringing. I might tell them to get lost.
Just go ahead.
Hang on. Hello. I can't talk. I'm on the line. Can you call me in 15 minutes? Thank you. Oh, do you know, that's a good friend of mine, Michael Liner. And of course, I was meant to be going in 10 days' time to go and stay in Mustique with him and his wife, because I still have very strong connections with Mustique. And this morning I rang. I cancelled me going because there's no way I can go jetting off. I actually follow the government's rules. I believe in what's going on here. I'm not one of those people that say that COVID doesn't exist, because I had it myself over Christmas, but I was lucky. I only had 4 days of discomfort and then spent 2 weeks in bed over Christmas and New Year. The perfect place to be, watching, boring television. Well, something on television. Great. Well, I feel fantastic now.
Dana, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. You've given us half an hour more than you promised to begin with. There are some outstanding questions which you can go back to afterwards, but let me say good night to the many people who joined us tonight, and to thank you so much for choosing us to be your vessel to bring your book into the world. I hope you'll come and join us again to do another event of your choosing. But
for my next book, you mean? I have got another book called Mirrors of Love, but it's a book of quotations that was inspired by Bob Dylan, who actually, when he was here, he wanted books on quotations, and so it's an art book. But I might do another book. So yes, Nina, I'll be back, because you only promote books, don't you?
No, we can promote anything you want. We can promote you. So this has been an hour where we heard bits about your life. If you want to do some more events about different aspects of what you did we will definitely, we can talk. I'm up for anything.
I'm happy to do anything. Of course, I need technical support. I've got it here with, because I don't touch machinery, as you know, being such an old fossil. But if anyone wants to, and if they want to write into you and have some suggestions, I'm happy to chat away till the cows come home, because that's what I enjoy doing. And it's fun, and I hope all the listeners have been having a good time as well.
I am sure they have been having a good time. I'm going to send a feedback request right after we finish here with the links to your book, and we'll ask for comments, because sadly in this format it is very hard for you to gauge how people are responding, because I know all you see is your slide. But believe me, we had a large audience tonight, and judging by the number of questions, people really engaged with your story. So let you go, Dana.
Well, thank you,
and thank you.
I mean, I would say goodbye. I've got two ways of saying goodbye. One might be when I'm being rather flippant, and I would say peace and love and 5-star hotels, which is kind of tongue-in-cheek. But in fact, my real way of saying goodbye would be to say start the day with love, spend the day with love, fill the day with love, and end the day with love. And if you live like that, your life is going to go a whole lot better. So I'll see you all next time if you ask me back.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dana. Good night, everyone.
Good night.